Well, we were just talking about the million people on the streets. Of course, migration being a key driver to encourage that activity. So, what are your thoughts on that issue at the moment?
Well, I think specifically migration is only pushed out as a problem in order that a solution may be divined. And the latest in the sort of summer narrative, the latest chapter concerns the migrant arrested in Epping. And he has now just been convicted by Chelmsford Magistrates Court. And this is put up by the BBC, who say that Epping hotel asylum seeker jailed for sex assaults. Now, the point of the BBC article really is to continue to fan the flames of division, helplessness, and confusion. And particularly, they go a bundle on confirming the worst fears of people who do have concerns about this, in that the suggestion is that people who do come from other countries have different standards, and that is absolutely a well-founded concern, as though because he's Ethiopian, he didn't have any understanding of how things work here. In actual fact, of course, the age of consent in Ethiopia is 18, and he is reported as being a Christian. So further confusion here about, is this another sort of dig at Christianity? Or a lot of language used deliberately to confuse and conflate. As to the trial itself, and indeed the ruling handed down, which has come from Chelmsford Magistrates Court, point to note, first of all, that these offences, which are now shown on screen: attempted sexual assault on a child aged 14, to incite or cause a child to engage in sexual activity, sexual assault on a female, twice, two different people, and harassment without violence. Now, they're all what's called either way, tribal either way, which means they could have gone to Crown Court, but actually they were retained by the Magistrates Court, which means that there was a maximum of 12-month sentence. And a lot of people, therefore, have been provoked into outcry, saying, well, it's not nearly a strong enough sentence, should have been much greater, and all the rest of it. Now, I can understand exactly why those concerns would be there, but of course, by limiting it to the Magistrates Court, meaning that the sentence was only going to be that, and what one has to look at really are the sentencing guidelines from the Sentencing Council, and they're shown on screen now, and one has to determine the offence category, which of course is done by two different categories, looking at the harms and the culpability. And it's almost as though this story has been cherry-picked in order specifically to make it look like nothing has been done, because the threshold in every single circumstance is not quite met. Essex Police, of course, have reported on this as well. And they bring out the points that there's also a 5-year sexual harm prevention order being set against the man, Hadush Kibatu, and also that he'd be on the sexual offences register for 10 years. Now, the point being missed here, of course, is that because the UK Border Act 2007 has qualifying criteria for automatic deportation, the length of the sentence, and indeed any of the other things that Essex Police are mentioning, should be academic. And this is further reinforced by the announcement made by the government just last month concerning what they're calling immediate deportation. He is now to be regarded as a foreign criminal stipulated by the Border Act 2007, and indeed he has a sentence of at least 12 months. However, the Daily Mail reporting here, of course, that now there might be a counterclaim effectively engaging the European Convention on Human Rights in order that this is not going to lead to deportation. Again, something that seems to be deliberately put out in order to inflame tensions. And as a banner across the top of the Daily Mail piece, it's shown on screen now. It says, breaking news, foreign criminals are being given £2,000 when they leave the United Kingdom. So there are just so many elements of this particular story to suggest that the problem is, in effect, insurmountable. And then we cast our mind back to Operation Restoring Justice, which was something put on by Reform a short while ago, in which they proposed to have a plan for mass deportations. And part of that was to get out of the European Convention on Human Rights, and indeed to repeal the Human Rights Act 1988, which in effect would head off exactly the situation that the Mail is forecasting. So they're attempting to look strong, attempting to make the case for there being a political solution to this. Has become a key political background. But what's not to be forgotten is that this always leads to exactly the same place. And here we have Sarah Pochin, the Reform MP, talking about where that place is.
About what Chris Philp is now saying, the Shadow Home Secretary, on ID cards. What do you feel about ID cards, digital ID cards? Is that something that Reform UK would support?
Well, look, I personally don't have a problem with an ID card. You know, I don't see what the issue is. Most of our information now is on our smartphones anyway.
Can we trust the system, though?
Well, what more? How much more could we be at risk? As I say, all of our information is out there in a cloud, in the ether, whatever you want to call it.
So I can't sit here and say that that is absolutely reform policy, but what I can say is that, of course, as one of the few MPs at a time where Danny Kruger has just joined the party and said that they're preparing for government, and there is, of course, an enormous public swing towards reform, a political solution looks very likely to include a digital ID. And of course, I just remind you finally about BritCard, which is the solution proposed by the Labour Together think tank. And just to quote from that, this is exactly matching the problem. 1 million people live in the UK without permission to do so, undermining the sense of fair play. And this is how BritCard is how a mandatory, universal national identity credential can help Britain control illegal migration and secure its borders. Because, of course, we got the question of, well, what if Kibatu is deported back to Ethiopia? Well, lo and behold, we don't have an agreement with Ethiopia. So there's another stumbling block. But of course, if we had a digital identity, then we'd know whether or not he was trying to come back or whether he was still in the system. So what's being done about this? Well, one thing just to point out is Big Brother Watch's campaign, which they're entitling Checkpoint Britain, and they've just had a survey conducted by YouGov, which was admittedly fairly small, only just over 2,000 respondents, all online, but overwhelmingly 63% of people absolutely rejecting wholesale the idea of digital ID. And finally, they point you to a petition that they've started, which has only attracted 100,000 signatures so far, but there'll be a link in the show notes for you to take a look at that.
Charles, thank you very much for that. Vanessa, let's come